I'm Dwight Drummond. Tonight, a weekend of gun violence in the city has left 2 people dead and several injured.
These were different events in different locations, but I don't feel that the general public is in any danger.
Across Toronto, there were half a dozen shootings. Now police are appealing to witnesses to help them make arrests. Plus, say goodbye to single-use plastics such as grocery bags, straws, and cutlery. Ottawa is going to ban them by the end of the year. And
the demand has been very high. We've had wait lists since November.
Summer camps back on and booked up, but many are struggling to find enough staff. We're learning more about a violent weekend in our city that left 2 men dead and several others seriously injured. There have been 6 shootings since Friday, including 4 yesterday in the span of just 6 hours. Delma Nuknuk now with the latest.
This was the scene at 1455 McCowan Road last night around 8 o'clock. Multiple shots rang out at an unsanctioned car meet that wasn't supposed to be there.
I believe 1755 Pickering Parkway area. That event, it was my understanding, in the hundreds of vehicles, was moved westbound, obviously westbound into TPS, into our Scarborough area.
Police believe there are many witnesses and perhaps dashcam video and are appealing for them to come forward. 4 victims, 3 adult men and 1 woman were shot and are recovering from their injuries. Earlier in the day, a man was found suffering from gunshot wounds here in Lawrence Heights. 2 hours before that, 2 teenage boys, 15 and 17 years old, were shot multiple times near a playground. All are expected to survive. There was also a fatal shooting on Friday and a non-fatal incident on Saturday. Despite the violence, police say the city is safe and that the guns issue is a foreign one.
The issue with firearm violence in Toronto specifically are imported crime guns from the United States. That is an issue. They're not traditionally legally purchased firearms from the Canadian market or the Ontario market.
24-year-old Jeron Williams was among many gathered on Lotherton Pathway for Father's Day celebrations. Williams was shot just after 4 o'clock and died on scene. Today, dozens of people stopped by to set up a memorial, placing flowers, lighting candles, and pouring out liquor. Williams' father was nearby the shooting when it happened and did not want to appear on camera. He says his son was an aspiring musician and a beacon of light. Williams' girlfriend sat near the memorial in tears, watching his music video. 4 people were seen fleeing the scene in a vehicle immediately following the shooting. That vehicle is described as a 2010 to 2015 beige or champagne-colored Chevrolet Equinox. Police are asking that anyone with any information contact them. Dale Manuktuk, CBC News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, a shooting in Brampton early Sunday morning left 2 men dead. It happened outside a convention center during a Father's Day event. Greg Ross talked to the manager of the facility today.
This cell phone video shows the chaotic scene in the parking lot of the Shadney Convention Center at around 2 o'clock Sunday morning. It was just moments after numerous shots were fired. Emergency crews attempted to revive one man who had just been shot.
I seen them trying to revive him. I was there when they actually got the pulse.
He later died in hospital. Another man who had been shot was pronounced dead on the scene. The manager of the Shanley Center says that neither the suspects or the victims were here as part of the event that he was hosting on Saturday night. Richard Marshall says he was hosting a Father's Day party at the convention center. He says the people involved with the shooting did try to get in, but were turned away by security. He later learned they had come from another party.
They came from another event. They had altercation at another event.
That has not been confirmed by police, who say they are still gathering information and looking for witnesses who may be able to shed some light on why this happened.
Circumstances that led up to this incident, either before, during, or after the interaction.
Marshall says the parking lot was crowded at the time of the shooting.
The event was almost over, so people was actually leaving to go to their cars to exit, to go home.
Police have gathered security footage from the venue. At this point, they have not released the identities of the victims and haven't provided any details about suspects. Greg Ross, CBC News, Brampton.
A man accused of setting a woman on fire on a TTC bus last week made a brief court appearance today. 33-year-old Tenzin Norbu appeared by video link from a detention center. Police say the attack at a West End bus station is being treated as a hate-motivated crime. The suspect is facing charges that include attempted murder and assault with a weapon. The court has imposed a publication ban on certain details related to the case, including any information that could identify the victim. The woman remains in hospital with what police have described as life-altering injuries. Metrolinx has released shocking video of a GO train slamming into a car trying to cross the rail tracks as the train was coming. You're about to see that the car did not make it. In the roughly 1 minute long video, the SUV can be seen approaching the rail crossing just as the gate closes. This happened in an area in Maine near Shepherd and Keel Street. The vehicle appears to stop just before the tracks, but the train enters and slams into it. Metrolinx says the driver was okay, but is facing charges for attempting this. Officials continue to warn, ignoring rules at railway crossings is dangerous and can lead to death. The federal government plans to spend billions of dollars to help modernize NORAD, the Canadian early warning system. Defense Minister Anita Anand made the announcement today. It comes amid growing concerns about potential aggression by Russia. Evan Dyer has more.
Defense Minister Anita Anand today announced Canada's biggest upgrade to continental defense since the end of the Cold War. $4.9 billion over the next 6 years to build 3 new lines of early warning radars. The first, a northern approaches line that will go from the U.S. border to the Arctic and use over-the-horizon radars to detect incoming missiles. Secondly, a polar line, similar to the old DEW line in the high Arctic, but with the ability to see further. And thirdly, a system called Crossbow, a classified radar system. All we know about it is that there will be several stations around Canada, but its capabilities, of course, are secret. And finally, Canada will invest in satellite intelligence, new satellites, cameras to try to detect intelligence on the ground in potential threat countries and hopefully predict launches before they happen.
The old doomsday weapon, the intercontinental ballistic missile, hasn't gone away. North Korea is the latest to develop those. But the ICBM has also been supplemented by new ways of delivering nuclear warheads, including for many years now launched from submarines. But what's really worrying NORAD are new hypersonic missiles, including cruise missiles and air-launched glide missiles, some of which can pull evasive maneuvers, fly low to the ground, and dodge attempts to detect or intercept them. Both Russia and China now have those. Russian state TV has lately taken to boasting about some of its most worrying nuclear weapons, like a submarine drone bomb designed to create a giant tsunami of radioactive water.
It's a reminder that tensions with Russia in particular go far beyond the war in Ukraine. They also include new nuclear threats that extend from below the ocean into Earth's orbit and that render this continent's defenses increasingly obsolete. Evan Dyer, CBC News, CFB Trenton.
Premier Doug Ford's new cabinet will be sworn in on Friday. The ceremony is set to start at 10 a.m. and will be followed by remarks from the Premier. Invitations have gone out to guests, but a government source says the Premier has not yet made calls to new cabinet ministers to inform them of their new posts. Ford was re-elected earlier this month with a majority 83 seats in the Ontario legislature. Last day of spring, and we're heading right into the heat because summer's on the way, and it feels like it's not even early summer, Colin.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We're going to just jump right into like the peak of summer in terms of where we're going with our temperatures and with our humidity as well. I know it's not there yet. This is one evening. We've got some wet weather coming back at us, but one evening where you can at least kind of enjoy the temperatures being a little more comfortable. 22 right now in Toronto, 19 in Oshawa, so still in the teens there, and Windsor 28. But boy, they're really going to be seeing the heat. There it's going to get into heat wave territory, meaning it's going to last for several days, whereas for us in the GTA, this is going to be a couple of days that we're going to be seeing that heat really coming on. We look at those dew points, and again, look how low they are into eastern Ontario, really comfortable, drier air, and beginning to build, but still not uncomfortable in southwestern Ontario. I'm going to show you these again tomorrow, and you're going to see how dramatically things will change. So we go into for Tuesday and for Wednesday. This heat warning that is in place because highs will be 31 to 35, humidex values of 37 to 45. That 45 you'll find here in Essex County towards Chatham-Kent. And then the overnight lows as well. When we have those that are above 20, that also means that we're just not seeing things really improve in those hours, although it's slightly better. Some of the rain that's really passing more from north to south in terms of how it's moving. So just kind of tagging through the GTA. Then a bit of a reprieve. We'll watch later on tonight as we get into the overnight hours and into early tomorrow morning. We will see some of this coming through and some of the remnants at times a bit heavier because it will be the leftover of some thunderstorms. Then we get into Tuesday and we get into sunshine, a few extra clouds at times. Mostly it's just going to be sunny and hot. Up to 32 degrees for us, feeling near 40. Lots of water, breaks from the sun. Don't leave pets or anyone in the car either. You know, I always like to remind folks of that too, Dwight.
It's important. Thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
This weather update is brought to you by Charlevoix Train, one of the most beautiful railways in Canada. Discover this spectacular railway from Quebec City.
Canadian companies won't be able to import or make many single-use plastic items for use in this country by the end of the year. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault made the announcement today. Rafi Boudjikanian has more.
It's been years since almost any plastic at this restaurant was anything but biodegradable or recyclable.
Our bowls, our straws, forks, spoons, chopsticks, all have been biodegradable. It's always been super important to be mindful of the output of our waste.
But you add takeout to the equation and it becomes harder. At this taco joint, Uber orders are currently placed in plastic bags.
10 times more per bag, so we're talking maybe from 4 or 5 cents for a plastic bag to 50, 60 cents for a paper bag. Hopefully between now and 2023, the people who have decided to implement this policy. We'll also maybe try and find a way to ensure that small businesses like us are provided with cost-effective options.
The government, though, is already behind on its single-use plastics ban, originally slated for 2021. Now it says by the end of this year, nobody in Canada will be allowed to manufacture or import plastic straws, bags, cutlery, stir sticks, six-pack rings, and styrofoam takeout boxes. By December 2023, nobody will be able to sell them here.
This decision is supported by science. It will keep our environment clean and wildlife healthy. Our ultimate goal is zero plastic waste. And thanks to these prohibitions, Canada is one important step closer.
A step too far, says industry. It would rather be allowed to recycle more plastics.
Why not allow industry the time to show that through investments, through innovation, we can actually have one of the most robust recycling systems in the world?
But environmental groups warn the government instead needs to speed up banning more plastics.
And these are things such as, hot and cold beverage cups, cigarette filters, multi-layered packaging, those pouches, that have become so common.
The federal government says it's not ruling out adding more items to the banned list as it goes along. For now, Canadian manufacturers will still be allowed to export single-use plastics for sale until the end of 2025. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ukraine is closer to joining the EU now that the European Commission supports its status as a candidate for membership. The process of joining the political economic union could take many years, but there are already concerns about possible reprisals from Russia. Salima Shivji reports.
The latest warning from Ukraine's president of a difficult week ahead comes just days after this boost from the European Commission.
Yes, Ukraine deserves European perspective. Yes, Ukraine should be welcomed as a candidate country.
And days before a formal vote to grant Ukraine candidate status in the EU, a historic vote that could drastically change Ukraine's political future.
I think it is obvious to everyone that since 1991, there have been few such fateful decisions for Ukraine as we expect now.
But also one, says President Volodymyr Zelensky, that could have immediate consequences.
We should expect greater hostile activity from Russia, purposefully, demonstratively, This week exactly, and not only against Ukraine, but also against other European countries. We are preparing. We are ready. We warn partners.
Zelensky, fresh off a rare visit away from the capital, Kyiv, he traveled to the southern part of the country on the Black Sea to visit damaged buildings in Mykolaiv and speak with soldiers on the front line. This is fresh fighting, very fierce, continues in the east as it settles into a war of attrition with no major developments on either side as Russia tries to gain full control of the Donbass. The Kremlin has said that it doesn't matter to them. It has nothing against Ukraine joining the EU since it is not a military bloc, but that it is watching developments carefully. This as more warnings pile up from NATO as well as from the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson that the world needs to be prepared for the war in Ukraine to last years. Similar concerns from Britain's new top soldier. General Patrick Sanders sent out an internal note to all ranks and civil servants, basically warning that the world has changed since Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February. That there is now, he says in the note, a burning imperative for the army to be prepared for a land battle, to stand alongside its allies and try to defeat Russia. Sanders says that this is the generation that must prepare for the army to fight in Europe once again. Salima Shivji, CBC News, London.
What was billed as a fast-track visa program when it was announced in March for Ukrainians fleeing the war has turned into a waiting game. Potential refugees were told their emergency visas could be processed in just a couple of weeks, but as Angelina King reports, more than half of those who applied to come here are still waiting.
Oksana Grigorvia has been painting in black and white as a symbol of the suffering in her home country.
It's very stressful and it's very hard.
But today she's adding some color, hoping painting this landscape helps ease her worries about her parents.
I love my parents and I want to help them.
Her parents have been displaced for 3 months after fleeing their home in Kharkiv. In March, their visa applications, along with fingerprints and photos, were received through the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel program. The Canadian government said processing time would take about 2 weeks, but 3 months later, her parents are still waiting and now forced to be apart, staying at separate volunteers' homes in neighboring Poland.
I feel like something went wrong there and just nobody sees it.
According to the federal government, as of June 8th, it received just over 296,000 applications. Of those, about 131,000 have been approved. In other words, less than half, or approximately 164,000 of those hoping to flee the war, are still waiting.
Any extra day for them is already adding to their trauma and, their fear of what's going to happen.
Toronto-based Ukrainian immigration lawyer Ksenia Charin says the average turnaround time she's seeing is about 4 to 6 weeks. She says some application centers in Europe haven't been operating at full capacity due to the pandemic, which is slowing things down. The Canadian government says it's working around the clock to bring Ukrainians here safely and has deployed additional staff, supplies, and equipment. Grigorvia says her parents are starting to give up hope and are considering going back home to Kharkiv.
They are destroying the infrastructure and just residential houses, schools and hospitals. And I'm like, how can you go home? It's not just not safe. We're not even sure that your home is there.
Here, they have a home with their daughter while she anxiously waits for good news. Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
Today marks World Refugee Day, and over the last several years, Canada has welcomed large influxes of refugees. At Women's College Hospital, a clinic that's been operating for 10 years is providing specialized health care for people coming into the country. Kirthana Sasatharan visited the clinic.
Hi, welcome to the Crossroads Clinic. Come this way.
When we opened here at Women's College Hospital, it was the first clinic in the city that exclusively sees refugees and refugee claimants.
For over 10 years, Dr. Rashid and his team have been providing healthcare supports, from pregnancy care to management of chronic illnesses. The clinic has seen over 5,000 refugees, and those new patients have come in waves.
We saw a number of the Syrian refugees that arrived. We've seen a number of people from places like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Nigeria, Afghanistan, Iraq. Of course, now we're dealing with a large group of Afghans that have been coming to Canada since the takeover of by the Taliban last year, and now, of course, the Ukrainians. Many, through their journeys here, have been exposed to high rates of infectious diseases. We also see a lot of people who come from places in the world where they've never had primary care.
Care isn't always delivered in a hospital setting.
When we started to see Afghans arrive here, they were all coming through a hotel that they would stay at for their first few weeks or months here. And so we were able, with some of our colleagues in the community and some other healthcare organizations, put a clinic into the hotel they were living in.
And the ultimate goal of the clinic is to provide that safe space.
I felt it from the way the patients interact with the services here. They feel very grateful.
Medical student Mariam Issa's parents came to Canada as refugees. She's seen how a clinic like this helps people in transition.
And even if a service is not offered at this clinic specifically, there are a lot of services that other individuals know about that they can connect them with.
Through his work, Dr. Rashid says it's important to understand how valuable refugees are to Canada, and we need to do more to support them.
Refugees have made such significant contributions to Canadian society, and that's an important thing to remember, is that it's not just an act of generosity. There's a lot in it for Canada in terms of getting people who are deeply committed to the country.
Kirtan Asasi-Theron, CBC News, Toronto.
CBC has discovered a retirement home in Ottawa where several Catholic clergymen convicted of sex crimes are cared for and protected. Some priests and oblate brothers who abuse children in residential schools, northern communities, and various parishes across Canada are given refuge at the Springhurst Residence. The oblate order says it provides monitoring and care for those who've been convicted. But as Julie Ayrton reports, critics say there's no such support for survivors.
The Springhurst Residence is nestled in this family neighborhood, just footsteps from a park and Ottawa's Rideau River. For decades, several men who abused children in residential schools in various parishes across the country have taken refuge at this residence, owned by the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. Some have stayed while awaiting trial or after serving time in prison. Bob Gordon lives in the neighborhood. He wasn't aware of the dark history of some of the facility's residents.
Nobody actually said that they were shocked. And that kind of just made me question what our perceptions of the institution, that they can have those types of people that are in there. Nobody in the community knows about it, but nobody's actually shocked that they're actually there.
Springhurst was the home where Leona Huggins' abuser came to live after his conviction. John McCann repeatedly sexually abused her for years at a parish in British Columbia, and she wasn't his only victim. Huggins was the first to report McCann's abuse in the 1990s. Then she blew the whistle again years after his conviction. She found out he was still working as a parish priest in Ottawa and living here at Springhurst.
It's hard to see these men being so well taken care of when the survivors have not been. They've ignored the survivors. They've often, for someone like me, I was ostracized. I wasn't only ignored, I was ostracized for something that I should have been ultimately thanked for.
The head of the Oblates says the order now has a written policy dictating how to monitor sex offenders.
The reason that we continue to house and that we continue to care for them is to allow us to continue to monitor. Recidivism is a real concern with people who have offended against minors, and this is a way to mitigate the possibility of reoffending.
But a former priest thinks those convicted should be kicked out.
They shouldn't be allowed to remain in the religious orders or in a diocese. They should be laicized, because the excuse that we have the opportunity to monitor them, to keep an eye on them, to do all this stuff is a very weak one, because in practice that has not been very, very well carried out.
There are currently 19 Oblate members living at Springhurst. 2 of the elderly priests were convicted of sexual crimes. The Oblates have a policy to care for them for life, and in total, CBC has confirmed at least 9 convicted sex offenders who have taken refuge here.
What are the victims getting? A compensatory remuneration is nothing compared to the ruined lives that they have gone through when they're being fully catered to in a facility.
Julie Ireton, CBC News, Ottawa.
Winnipeg police say they are changing the way they deal with Indigenous families who have missing and murdered loved ones. That starts with acknowledging the traumatic past and present for many. It comes as 3 young First Nations women were all killed last month in Winnipeg in just 2 weeks. Marina von Stackelberg reports.
A lot of re-triggering.
Sue Caribou can't forget how Winnipeg police treated her family nearly a decade ago. Her niece, Tanya Nipanak, was missing. Officers were about to search a city landfill for her remains.
They said they would clean a spot for us where we can see them searching. But instead, when I got there, I got chased away. We didn't get to watch like they promised us.
Nipanak was never found. This week, Winnipeg police returned to the same spot, looking for the remains of another Indigenous woman, Rebecca Contois.
I cried. I let my tears go.
This time, police did things differently. They recently hired a special advocate to work with Indigenous families. And before starting to search the landfill, there was a ceremony with a sacred fire and counseling.
It might not mean anything to them, but to us, it means a lot when we do a ceremony first. It's our traditional way.
Police are often wary of anything they think could impede their investigation, says social work professor David DeLay.
That narrow focus has rendered police insensitive.
The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls recommended police forces across Canada make sure they are culturally sensitive and take into consideration historical and present trauma felt by families. Bringing in more Indigenous expertise is essential, says former Inquiry Commissioner Michelle Odette.
We talk about the police force across Canada. We ask them to be social worker, liaison, interpreters, or we ask them to be all of that when they weren't trained to be all of that.
Odette would like to see police agencies throughout the country take the lead from Winnipeg Police and adopt similar practices. Because she says when police take the steps to work with Indigenous communities, it helps build trust. And that could ultimately help with investigations. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A Japanese court today ruled that a ban on same-sex marriage is not unconstitutional. 3 same-sex couples had filed a case in the Osaka District Court claiming the opposite. LGBTQ activists have denounced the ruling. They say the law, as it stands, makes it legal to discriminate against people based on their sexuality. Despite the ban, some municipalities issue certificates to same-sex couples that enable them to rent places together and have hospital visitation rights. More than half of Japan's population is covered by such agreements. Japan is now the only G7 nation that bans same-sex marriage. Ahead of Pride festivities across the city this weekend, the province is marking Pride Month by raising both the Pride and Trans flags at Queen's Park. Members of the upcoming legislature were joined by members of the queer community this morning.
The inability to be queer in culturally conducive ways is extremely invalidating, invisibilizing, and infuriating. And that is why I passionately advocate for queer South Asian visibility. I'm beyond honored to be the first queer South Asian woman to speak at Ontario's Pride flag raising ceremony.
Members of provincial parliament from the major parties were on hand for the flag raising. The Ontario Public Service Pride Network put the event on and raises both the Pride and Trans flag each June. Last day of spring, summer's coming in, it's solstice time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we made it. Here we go, launching ourselves into summer and that solstice. Just to give you a little bit of that science lesson in terms of what it actually means for us. And what we have is when we see that tilt of the Earth and it makes that shift so that we get closer to the sun. So that sun angle, the northern hemisphere, it's as close as it's going to be. Watch that UV index for tomorrow because there will be plenty of sunshine. Highest point in the sky, but also the longest day in terms of daylight. And how does that compare to the winter solstice? Well, how about 6.5 hours, just about 6.5 hours more daylight than what we get. You know, those winter days seem pretty short. And then when does it come in? How about 5:13 a.m. tomorrow morning? So very, very early, and that's the length of daylight that we will be seeing. And with that, I mentioned how much sun, that sun angle, and the heat. This is it, that heat dome returning, basically setting up once again in the U.S. and pushing now eastward and moving that heat and humidity into southern Ontario. As it does, we see our temperatures really popping up. So we're at 22 right now, 19 in Oshawa, some 20s for Hamilton and Kitchener. This board will not look like this as we get to this time tomorrow. As well, the humidex values comfortable. They will not look like this into tomorrow. Now, in the meantime, what do we have to get through? We do have some rain that's coming through. It's kind of some remnant thunderstorm activity, but it's still working its way across the GTA and Golden Horseshoe later on tonight. That was the first batch. A bit more to come here as we go through those evening hours. And so because of that, I'd say later this evening on through till about the early morning, that's when we'll still have some wet weather, and then we'll see that drying up. At times it could be a bit heavier, but much of that is going to push off towards the east. We get into the sunshine tomorrow, and then a little bit of cloud cover at times, but primarily it just gets a little hazy because of the humidity levels going up for us. And then into Wednesday, we'll even see some triggers with the risk of getting into some scattered thunderstorm activity. So there's your heat warning that is in place. And keep in mind, heat exhaustion, what it seems like. You can be dizzy, faint, a rapid heartbeat, any of these kinds of things, then you know you really need to take it easy. Headache is another symptom as well for heat exhaustion. So looking at where we're going here, the high, oh boy, this didn't update. This is not the high, and I will fix this for you because we are actually going up tomorrow to 32 degrees in terms of what we'll be seeing. Let's just get rid of that. And then as we go into Wednesday, Dwight, around 31 to 32. So it is heat warning criteria and those humidex values near 40.
I know we had high 20s there, and Colette's like, no, that's not enough.
Yeah,
I got more for you. We'll fix it later. Thank you, Colette.
You got it.
Hockey Canada executives are appearing in front of the Canadian Heritage Committee on Parliament Hill today, answering questions about the organization's financials. Documents obtained by CBC News shows Hockey Canada received $14 million worth of federal support over the last 2 years. Politicians will try to determine whether any of that money was used to settle a multi-million-dollar lawsuit brought on by a woman who alleges she was sexually assaulted by 8 former CHL players in 2018. The organization says no public funds were used to settle the civil suit. Advocates say sexual assault allegations are still happening in hockey because players need resources in preventative education. They're calling on Hockey Canada to be more transparent with the public. Many children are excited to be going to summer camp, some for the first time since the start of the pandemic. And after 2 years of restrictions, early enrollment is high. But some camps are finding it tough to find staff. Jamie Strachan has this report.
The demand has been very high. We've had wait lists since November.
With COVID restrictions easing, Howie Grossinger says parents are eager to get their children back outside. In less than 2 weeks, the owner of Camp Robin Hood hopes to welcome about 700 eager campers to the sprawling property just north of Toronto.
100% staffing has been the single biggest challenge in the industry.
Grossinger says while camper enrollment is high, it's been hard for many camps across Canada to find staff.
I'm probably looking to fill anywhere between 10 and 15 spots, which is not typical for this time of year for me.
In Quebec, the municipality of La Pêche told families it had to scrap all its summer camp programs.
We receive on average every year about 60 CVs. We've received 15 this year.
In BC, the Provincial Camp Association says many of its members still need to fill about 50% of their positions.
We don't have the adequate supervision to run this number of kids, and we might have to turn people away, which is heartbreaking. We hate that. That's a camp director's worst nightmare.
Thiessen says there's a number of factors. For one, COVID disrupted the in-house training many camps rely on to fill jobs.
Suddenly we had a summer and a bit of no camp experience, and you had this demographic of young adults who found other opportunities.
So swim lessons are...
Crossinger says that more than ever, he's working to attract Canadians of different backgrounds.
Them being able to tell the story of their work experience to their parents so their parents can support this work experience. Because some parents who don't know what it's like to work at camp will say, no, I think you should work at the local big box or the mall.
He and owners across the country are doing all they can to ensure they have the staff in place to make this summer special for kids. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
The California company behind a hot sauce that's popular across North America has suspended production because it can't get enough hot peppers. The scarcity is due in part to farming disruptions caused by drought, and it's causing concern for the rest of the U.S. and Canada, who rely heavily on California for fruits and vegetables. Inayat Singh has more.
It's limiting the amount of ground that we can farm. It's limiting the amount of the intensity that we can farm.
California farmers are struggling in the third year of the worst drought on record, leading to water restrictions for farmers. The changing climate has caught up with the world-famous Sriracha hot sauce this summer. Hoi Fong Foods, its producer in California, has suspended production after extreme heat and drought hit the hot pepper crops the company uses.
For pepper and tomatoes, it's really more about heat stress. We get, last week we had 103 degrees, so that's about 41 degrees Celsius. And pollen basically aborts, at this stage, so you don't get fruit or flower set at these temperatures.
Hot peppers have been affected along with other vegetables and grains. 20% of all of Canada's crop imports come from California, worth $2.8 billion in 2021, and crop failures there could lead to price hikes and empty shelves here. All this brings new urgency to helping Canadian farmers produce our food closer to home.
We could rely on more Canadian crops and developing them more. I think we should definitely, seek out Canadian fruit and veg when we go to the grocery store.
Ottawa farmer Heiko Kreigsman grows several varieties of hot peppers and makes a popular line of hot sauces, but he says investment is critical to boost production here.
If there were ways that those actually being invested in greenhouses, for example, here in Canada, you can actually get a lot of the vegetables that are now being grown in the southern parts of the world in this place as well.
The drought in California shows the importance of local farms like Kreigsman's to help keep Canada's food supply stable. Inayat Singh, CBC News, Toronto.
As we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX closed up by 253 points. The Dow and U.S. stock markets are closed for the Juneteenth holiday, and our dollar traded higher at 76.96 cents U.S. Stay with us. We're coming right back. The pandemic has put a big dent in Canada's supply of blood and plasma, which is at an all-time low.
So right now, because of COVID, we lost 31,000 donors over the span of time. So we need 100,000 donors before the end of the year.
Today, Mississauga Fire and Emergency Services and other first responders were on hand to help kick off the Sirens for Life campaign. It's a partnership with Canadian Blood Services. The first responders rolled up their sleeves to help out with the shortages. Members of the public are also being encouraged to book an appointment to give blood. All right, did we fix it, Carla? We've got the numbers now?
Yes.
Okay.
You know when you write an essay or something and you save it and then you can't find it and you're like, ah!
That's why there's automatic save now, so we don't mess that up anymore.
Exactly. So I knew I saved it. I just had to find exactly where that file was. So I do have it for you. And we'll start off with what we already know here about this heat warning coming for Tuesday and for Wednesday. We are talking about our temperatures being in those low 30s, even towards the mid 30s in southwestern Ontario, but those humidex values are going to be oppressive. So we do need to all take it easy, make sure you are well hydrated, and try and stay out of the heat or take frequent frequent breaks as much as you can. So tonight, still have some rain to come through, some of the remnants of those thunderstorms, 17 degrees. But then we get into, yes, summer, the first day of summer tomorrow, 32 degrees, feeling close to 40, if not quite there. And then we get another day of it because we're not done with it there. Wednesday up to 30, feeling close to 40. And you'll notice maybe not heat warning criteria after that, Dwight, but still pretty warm.
Oh, we're not complaining. I'm told we're not allowed to complain yet. Thank you for that.
You're
That
welcome.
is it for us tonight. We'll see you.